Okay, this is the public reading for December 21st. Genesis 37, verse 1 through chapter 40, verse 23 is the Torah reading. And the gospel reading is Matthew chapter 17 through chapter 18. So let's start with the Torah reading. Genesis chapter 37, verse 1. Okay, and Yaakov settled, and Jacob and Jacob settled in the land of the sojourning of his father, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was shepherding the flock with his brothers. Now he was a helper with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, the wives of his father. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons, for he was a son of his old age. And he made a robe with long sleeves for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and were not able to speak peaceably to him. And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. And he said to them, "Listen now to this dream that I dreamed. Now behold, we were binding sheaves in the midst of the field, and behold, my sheaf stood up, and it remained standing. Then behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf." Then his brothers said to him, "Will you really rule over us?" And they hated him even more on account of his dream and because of his words. Then he dreamed yet another dream and told it to his brothers. And he said, "Behold, I dreamed a dream again. And behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars, or the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." And he told it to his father and to his brothers. And his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Will I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the ground to you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Now his brothers went to pasture the flock of their father in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing in Shechem? Come, let me send you to them." And he said, "Here I am." Then he said to him, "Go now, see if it goes well for your brothers and for the flock. Then return word to me." And he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he arrived at Shechem. And a man found him, and behold, he was wandering about in a field. And the man asked him, "What do you seek?" And he said, "I'm seeking my brothers. Tell me, please, where they are pasturing." And the man said, "They have moved on from here. For I heard them saying, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" Then Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. And they saw him from a distance. And before he drew near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. And each said to his brothers, "Look, this master of dreams is coming. Now then, come, let us kill him and throw him in one of the pits. Then we will say a wild animal devoured him. Then we will see what his dreams become." And Reuben heard it and delivered him from their hand and said, "We must not take his life." And Reuben said to them, "You must not shed blood. Throw him into this pit that is in the desert, but do not lay a hand on him, so that he might rescue him from their hand or return him to his father." And it happened that as Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped Joseph of his robe, the robe with long sleeves that was upon him. When they took him and threw him into the pit was empty, there was no water in it. They sat down to eat some food, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead. And their camels were carrying aromatic gum and balm and spices on the way to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, but our hand shall not be against him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and brought him up from the pit, and they sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they brought Joseph to Egypt. Then Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes. And he returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone. Now what can I do?" Then they took the robe of Joseph and slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. Then they sent the robe with long sleeves, and they brought it to their father and said, "We found this. Please examine it. Is it the robe of your son or not?" And he recognized it and said, "The robe of my son. A wild animal has devoured him. Joseph is surely torn to pieces." And Jacob tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his loins, and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and daughters tried to console him, but he refused to be consoled. And he said, "No, I shall go down to my son to Sheol mourning." And his father wept for him. And the Midianites sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, a court official of Pharaoh, a commander of the imperial guard. And it happened that at that time Judah went down from his brothers and pitched his tent near a certain Adullamite, whose name was Hirah. And Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite there, whose name was Shua, and he took her and went into her. And she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name and she conceived again and bore a son, and he called his name Onan, and once again she bore a son, and she called his name Shalach. And he was in Chezib when she bore him. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. And the firstborn of Judah, was evil in the eyes of Yahweh, and Yahweh killed him. Then Judah said to Onan, Go into the wife of your brother, and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, and raise up offspring for your brother. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be for him. So whenever he went into the wife of his brother, he would waste it on the ground, so as not to give offspring to his brother. And what he did was evil in the sight of Yahweh, so he killed him also. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, Stay a widow in your father's house until Shalach my son grows up, for he feared he would also die like his brother. So Tamar went and stayed in the house of her father. And in the course of time, the daughter of Shua, the wife of Judah, died. When Judah was consoled, he went up to his sheep-bearers, he and his friend Hirah the Adulamite, to Timnah. And it was told to Tamar, saying, Look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So she removed the clothes of her widowhood, and covered herself with a veil, and disguised herself. And she sat at the entrance to Naim, which is on the way to Timnah, for she saw that Shalach was grown, but she had not been given to him as a wife. And Judah saw her, and reckoned her to be a prostitute, for she had covered her face. And he turned aside to her at the roadside, and said, Please, come, let me come in to you. For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, What will you give to me, that you may come in to me? And he said, I will send a kid from the goats of the flock. And she said, Only if you give a pledge until you send it. And he said, What is the pledge that I must give to you? And she said, Your seal, your cord, and your staff that is in your hand. And he gave them to her, and went into her. And she conceived by him. And she arose and left, and she removed her veil from herself, and put on the garments of her widowhood. And Judah sent the kid from the goats by the hand of his friend the Adulamite, to take back the pledge from the hand of the woman. But he could not find her. So he asked the men of her place, saying, Where is that cult prostitute that was in Naim by the roadside? And they said, There is no cult prostitute here. Then he returned to Judah and said, I could not find her. Moreover, the men of the place said, There is no cult prostitute here. And Judah said, Let her take them for herself, lest we be laughed at. Behold, I sent this kid, but you could not find her. And about 3 months later, it was told to Judah, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the whore, and now, behold, she is conceived by prostitution. And Judah said, Bring her out, and let her be burned. She was brought out, but she sent to her father-in-law, saying, By the man to whom these belong I have conceived. And she said, Now discern to whom these belong, the seal and cord and the staff. Then Judah recognized them and said, She is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son Shalach. And he did not know her again. And it happened that at the time she gave birth, that behold, twins were in her womb. And it happened that at her labor one child put out a hand, and the midwife took it and tied a crimson thread on his hand, saying, This one came out first. Then his hand drew back, and behold, his brother came out. And she said, What a breach you have made for yourself. And she called his name Perez. And afterward his brother, who had the crimson thread on his hand, came out, and his name was Zerah. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, a court official of Pharaoh, commander of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the hand of the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. And Yahweh was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master observed that Yahweh was with him, and everything that was in his hand to do, Yahweh made successful. And Joseph found favor in his eyes, and he served him. Then he appointed him over his house, and all that he owned he put into his hand. And it happened that from the time he appointed him over his house and over all that he had, Yahweh blessed the house of the Egyptian on account of Joseph. And the blessing of Yahweh was upon all that he did in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in the hand of Joseph. And he did not worry about anything except the food that he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. And it happened that after these things his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph. And she said, Lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, Look, my master does not worry about what is in the house, and everything he owns he has put in my hand. He has no greater authority in the house than me, and he has not withheld anything from me except you, since you were his wife. Now, how could I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And it happened that as she spoke to Joseph day after day, he did not heed her to lie beside her or to be with her. But one particular day he came into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house were there in the house. She seized him by his garment and said, Lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled, and he went outside. And it happened that when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside, she called to the men of her house and said to them, "Look, he brought a Hebrew man to mock us. He brought a Hebrew man to us to mock us. He came to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And when he heard me that I raised my voice and called out, he left his garment beside me and fled, and he went outside." Then she put his garment beside her until his master came to his house. Then she spoke to him according to these words, saying, "The Hebrew slave you brought to us came to me to make fun of me. And it happened that as I raised my voice and called out, he left his garment beside me and fled outside." And when his master heard the words of his wife, that she spoke to him, "This is what your servant did to me," he became very angry. And Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, the place that the king's prisoners were confined. And he was there in prison. And Yahweh was with Joseph, and showed loyal love to him, and gave him favor in the eyes of the chief of the prison. And the chief of the prison put all the prisoners that were in the prison into the hand of Joseph. And everything that was done there, he was the one who did it. The chief of the prison did not worry about anything in his hand, since Yahweh was with him. And it happened that after these things, the cupbearer, the king of Egypt, and his baker did wrong against their lord, against the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, with the chief cupbearer and chief baker, and he put them in custody, in the house of the chief of the guard, into the prison where Joseph was confined. And the chief of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended them. And they were in custody many days. And the two of them, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, dreamed a dream, each his own dream with its own interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he looked at them, and behold, they were troubled. And he asked the court officials of Pharaoh that were with him in the custody of his master's house, "Why are your faces sad today?" And they said to him, "We each dreamed a dream, but there is no one to interpret it." And Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." Then the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph, and he said to him, "In my dream, now behold, there was a vine before me, and on the vine were 3 branches, and as it budded, its blossoms came up, and its clusters of grapes grew ripe. And the cup of Pharaoh was in my hand, and I took the grapes and squeezed them into the cup of Pharaoh. Then I placed the cup into the hand of Pharaoh." Then Joseph said to him, this is its interpretation, "The 3 branches, they are 3 days. They are 3 days, and in 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and will restore you to your office. And you shall put the cup of Pharaoh into his hand, as was formerly the custom when you were his cupbearer. But remember me when it goes well with you, and please, may you show kindness with respect to me, and mention me to Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. For I was surely kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me in this pit." And when the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said to Joseph, "I also dreamed. In my dream, now behold, there were 3 baskets of bread upon my head, and in the upper basket were all sorts of baked foods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket upon my head." Then Joseph answered and said, "This is its interpretation. The 3 baskets, they are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift your head from you and hang you on a pole, and the birds will eat your flesh from you." And it happened that on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all his servants. And he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker in the midst of his servants. And he restored the chief cupbearer to his cupbearing position. And he placed the cup in the hand of Pharaoh. But the chief baker he hanged as Joseph had interpreted to them. But the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Okay, the gospel reading is Matthew 17 and 18. And after 6 days, so this is starting Matthew 17, and after 6 days, Yeshua took along Peter and James and John, his brother, and led them up on a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothing became bright as the light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. So Peter answered and said to Yeshua, "Lord, it is good that we are here. If you want, I will make here 3 shelters, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them. And behold, a voice from the cloud said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." And when the disciples heard this, they fell down on their faces and were extremely frightened. And Yeshua came and touched them and said, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one except him, Yeshua alone. And as they were coming down from the mountain, Yeshua commanded them, saying, "Tell no one the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead." And the disciples asked him, saying, "Then why do the scribes say that Elijah or Eliyahu must come first?" And he answered and said, "Elijah indeed is coming, and will restore all things. But I say to you that Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but did with him whatever they wanted. In the same way also the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands." Then the disciples understood that he had spoken to them about John the Baptist. And when they came to the crowd, a man approached him, kneeling down before him, and saying, "Lord, have mercy on my son, because he has seizures and suffers severely, for often he falls into the fire and often into the water. And I brought him to your disciples, and they were not able to heal him." And Yeshua answered and said, "O unbelieving and perverse generation, how long will I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring him here to me." And Yeshua rebuked him, and the demon came out of him, and the boy was healed from that hour. Then the disciples approached Yeshua privately and said, "Why were we not able to expel it?" And he said to them, "Because of your little faith. For truly I say to you, if you have faith like a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you." Now as they were gathering in Galilee, Yeshua said to them, "The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and on the third day he will be raised." And they were extremely distressed. And when they arrived at Capernaum, the ones who collected the double drachma tax came up to Peter and said, "Does your teacher not pay the double drachma tax?" And he said, "Yes." And when he came into the house, Yeshua spoke to him first, saying, "What do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth collect tolls or taxes? From their own sons or from foreigners?" And when he said, "From foreigners," Yeshua said to him, "Then the sons are free. But so that we do not give offense to them, go out to the sea, cast a line with a hook, and take the first fish that comes up. And when you open its mouth, you will find a 4 drachma coin. Take that and give it to them for me and you." At that time the disciples came up to Yeshua, saying, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And calling a child to himself, he had him stand in their midst and said, "Truly, I say to you, unless you turn around and become like young children, you will never enter into the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child, this person is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one child such as this in my name welcomes me. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him that a large millstone be hung on his neck and he be drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe to the world because of causes for stumbling, for it is a necessity that causes for stumbling come. Nevertheless, woe to the person through whom the cause for stumbling comes. And if your hand or your foot causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it from you. It is better for you to enter into life crippled or lame than having 2 hands or 2 feet to be thrown into the eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it from you. It is better for you to enter into life one-eyed than to have 2 eyes and to be thrown into fiery Gehenna. See to it that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you that their angels in heaven constantly see the face of my Father who is in heaven. What do you think? If a certain man has 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go and look for the one that wandered away? And if he happens to find it, truly I say to you that he rejoices over it more than over the 99 that did not wander away. In the same way, it is not the will of your Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones perish. Now, if your brother sins against you, go correct him between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you've gained your brother. But if he does not listen, take with you in addition 1 or 2 others, so that by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses every matter may be established. And if he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. But if he refuses to listen to the church also, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you release on earth will be released in heaven. Again, truly I say to you that if 2 of you agree on earth about any matter that they ask, it will be done for them from my Father who is in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there in the midst of them." Then Peter came up to him and said, "Lord, how many times will my brother sin against me, and I will forgive him? Up to 7 times? Yeshua said to him, "I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. For this reason the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man, a king, who wanted to settle accounts with his slaves. And when he began to settle them, someone was brought to him who owed 10,000 talents. And because he did not have enough to repay it, the master ordered him to be sold, and his wife and his children, and everything that he had, and to be repaid. Then the slave threw himself to the ground and began to do obeisance to him, saying, Be patient with me, and I will pay back everything to you. So the master of that slave, because he had compassion, released him and forgave him the loan. But that slave went out and found one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 denarii, and taking hold of him, he began to choke him, saying, Pay back everything that you owe. Then his fellow slave threw himself to the ground and began to implore him, saying, Be patient with me, and I will repay you. But he did not want to, but rather he went and threw him into prison until he would repay what was owed. So when his fellow slaves saw what had happened, they were extremely distressed, and went and reported to their master everything that had happened. Then his master summoned him and said to him, Wicked slave, I forgave you all that debt because you implored me. Should you not also have shown mercy to your fellow slave, as I also showed mercy to you? And because he was angry, his master handed him over to the merciless jailers, until he would repay everything that was owed. So also my heavenly Father will do to you, unless each of you forgives his brother from your hearts. Amen.